The woman my husband called his cousin attended our wedding as a guest and left as something else. There are women who enter a room and take nothing from it. They smile at the right moments. They hold their wine glasses at the precise angle of someone who rehearsed the words before the mirror that morning. And then there are women who enter a room and take everything, slowly, quietly, the way a river takes a riverbank. Not with violence, with patience, with the particular genius of water, which knows that it does not need to fight the stone. It only needs time. Adwoa Mensah was the second kind of woman. But Priscilla did not know this yet. On the evening of the 14th of August in the foyer of the Movenpick Ambassador Hotel in Accra, with white organza pooling around her ankles and her heart so full it frightened her, Priscilla knew almost nothing. She knew that she had married the man she loved. She knew that the jollof rice was slightly overcooked. She knew that her mother-in-law had cried during the vows, whether from joy or from the private grief of surrendering a son, she could not say. These were the things she knew. She did not know that the woman standing at the far end of the reception hall, the tall one in the burgundy dress, the one laughing at something Kofi had just said with the ease of someone who had been laughing at his jokes since Priscilla existed in his life, was not his cousin. She did not know that the laughter was not the laughter of family. It was the laughter of history, of intimacy, of a language built between two people in the dark, in the small hours, in the spaces where no one else was invited. She did not know any of this. So when Kofi's Auntie Adwoa touched her arm and said, "That is Adwoa, she is Kofi's cousin from Kumasi, they grew up together," Priscilla turned and smiled and walked across the marble floor in her white dress to greet this woman as family. And Adwoa opened both arms and embraced her. Not the polite half-hug of a stranger, but the full embrace of someone who had decided in advance what kind of woman she was going to be that evening. Both arms, chin resting briefly on Priscilla's shoulder, a perfume that was just a degree too intimate, too close, like a word whispered directly into the ear. "You are so beautiful," Adwoa said, pulling back to look at her. And her eyes, God, her eyes, said something else entirely. They said, "I know things about him that you have not yet learned to ask about." But Priscilla did not speak the language of those eyes yet. She was 28 years old and she was in love, and the band had just begun to play. And her husband was crossing the room towards them both, with that smile of his, the one that rearranged her entire interior whenever it landed on her. And she thought, "This is the best night of my life." She was right. It was. It was also the night that something began to end, so slowly, so quietly, that she would spend 2 years failing to notice the sound of it. If you are new here, please take a moment and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this one take time to tell. We are only just beginning. Let us go back, not too far, just far enough. Kofi Asante was 31 years old when he met Priscilla at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in East Legon. He was an architect. She was a pediatric nurse who had recently returned from 3 years working with MSF in South Sudan, and she had that quality that some people develop after witnessing real suffering. A directness, a refusal to perform smallness in order to make other people comfortable. She said what she meant. She laughed loudly. She disagreed with him over the fish at the table that evening and did not soften the disagreement with a smile. And Kofi, who had spent years in the company of women who curated themselves carefully in his presence, found this so startling and so beautiful that he called her the next morning at 7 a.m. and asked if she would have coffee with him. She said she didn't drink coffee. He said, "Then breakfast, or a walk, or nothing. I just want to keep talking to you." She said yes to the walk. They walked for 4 hours along the beach at Labadi that Saturday morning, and by the time they returned to their cars, neither of them was in any doubt about what was happening. It was that particular kind of meeting, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind that simply arrives and rearranges everything without asking permission. He did not mention Adwoa that morning. He did not mention her the following week or the month after that. He would not mention her for a very long time. And when he finally did, briefly, casually, the way you mention something you want to make seem unimportant, he would call her his cousin. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We are getting ahead of Priscilla. The thing about Adwoa Mensah is that she was not a monster. This is important to understand, because the story becomes too simple if she is a monster. Monsters are easy to identify. You see them coming, you close the door. You do not open both arms and hold them against your chest at your own reception hall. Adwoa was not a monster. She was something more complicated. She was a woman who loved a man for 9 years and watched him walk slowly towards another life without her. And she had made a decision. Not a good decision, not a decision she would recommend, but a human one, to remain close enough to the flame to keep warm even when the flame no longer belonged to her. She had met Kofi in 2012 when they were both at KNUST. She was studying law, he was in the architecture faculty. They met at a cultural festival, argued about the function of public art for 3 hours, and then went back to his room and discovered that they were the kind of people who argued brilliantly about ideas and needed each other terribly in the dark. They were for 4 years what young people in Kumasi called together but not together, which is to say they were everything to each other except that he would not fully commit and she would not fully leave, and the space between those two facts became the entire landscape of their relationship. When he graduated and moved to Accra for work, she told herself it was a practical separation. When months passed without him returning, she told herself he was busy. When he began to sound different on the phone, lighter somehow, like a man from whom something heavy had been quietly removed, she told herself she was imagining it. She was not imagining it. By the time Kofi met Priscilla at that dinner in East Legon, Adwoa had been practicing law in Kumasi for 2 years. They spoke on the phone once a month, sometimes less. They were, by any reasonable measure, no longer together. But the body does not always receive the same messages as the mind, and when Kofi called her in the spring of that year, the year before the wedding, and said with the particular gentleness of a man who is about to detonate something that there was someone he wanted her to know about, Adwoa's body understood what her mind refused to accept. She said, "That's wonderful. I'm happy for you." Her voice did not tremble. This was the first of many things Adwoa Mensah would do perfectly. And yet she came to the wedding. This is the part that needs explaining. This is the part that Priscilla would circle for years afterward, turning it over in her hands like a stone whose weight kept changing. Why did he invite her? He told Priscilla she was family. He said it the way you say something you have rehearsed, smoothly, without looking up from his phone. "Adwoa is coming, my cousin from Kumasi. You'll like her." And Priscilla, who had not yet developed the particular antenna that married women develop through pain and experience, the one that receives frequencies of omission, frequencies of casual deflection, said, "Which side is she on, your mother's or your father's?" And Kofi said, "My mother's side. They're very close, her family and ours. You know how it is in Kumasi. Everyone is cousin with everyone." And Priscilla laughed, because she did know. Because the word cousin in Ghanaian family networks is vast and elastic and holds multitudes, and because she was in the middle of seating arrangements and her caterer was calling and her dress was not yet fully altered and she had 300 other things demanding her attention. She did not ask a follow-up question. She would spend a long time wishing she had. The reception was beautiful. Let us say that clearly. It was genuinely, painfully beautiful. The kind of evening that photographs itself, that wraps itself in amber as it's happening so that every person present felt they were already remembering it while it was occurring. The decorations were gold and ivory.
The high life band played until midnight. The food, the overcooked jollof notwithstanding, was magnificent. A whole roasted lamb, fried yam, garden egg stew, a tower of chin-chin beside the wedding cake that made the children at the back tables lose their minds entirely. Priscilla danced. She danced with Kofi. She danced with her father. She danced with her bridesmaids. She danced alone in a circle of clapping relatives who showered her with money until the knot stuck to her dress. She was incandescent that evening. Every photograph from that night shows a woman who is completely, dangerously happy. And in the background of several of those photographs, if you knew to look, if you had the particular knowledge that would take Priscilla 2 more years to acquire, you could see Adwoa watching, not intrusively, not with the naked face of want, but watching the way that only a person with something to lose watches a scene they cannot participate in. Once, in one of the photographs, she is mid-laugh at something a man beside her has said, but her eyes are not laughing. Her eyes are elsewhere entirely. Her eyes are on Kofi's hand at the small of Priscilla's back. If Priscilla had ever looked at that photograph carefully, really carefully, the way grief sharpens the eyes retroactively, she would have seen it. That look, that specific, terrible, ancient look of a woman watching the man she loves belong to someone else. But photographs only reveal what we are ready to receive. Adwoa left the reception at 11:15. She came to say goodbye to Priscilla personally, found her at the dessert table, took both her hands, looked directly into her eyes. "Take care of him," she said. "He needs someone who won't disappear on him." Priscilla, slightly drunk on palm wine and joy, squeezed her hands and said, "That's so sweet. I'm so glad you came. You have to visit us when we are settled." Adwoa smiled. It was the most technically precise smile Priscilla had ever received, warm enough to feel genuine, contained enough to reveal nothing. "I will," Adwoa said. She did not say it like a promise. She said it like a statement of fact, like something she had already decided. She left the reception. She walked to her car where her driver was waiting. She sat in the back seat for several minutes before telling him to go. She did not cry. She would not let herself cry in a car hired by Kofi, his wedding gift to the out-of-town guests, the cars arranged to take them safely home. She pressed both hands flat against her thighs and breathed. Then she took out her phone and typed a single message to a contact saved under the name K. It said, "She is good. You chose well." She pressed send. She watched the 2 blue ticks appear. He did not reply that night. He was a married man now. His phone would be switched to silent, sitting on a nightstand in a honeymoon suite, and he was otherwise occupied. But in the morning, in the very early morning when the sun was just beginning to make its intentions known over the Gulf of Guinea, her phone buzzed once. He had replied with a single word. The word was, "Sorry." Adwoa read it. She read it 3 times. Then she put the phone face down on her bed in Kumasi and stood fully and completely for the first time what she had refused to understand for years. It was over. Except that it wasn't, because human hearts are not reasonable, because sorry is not the same as goodbye, because the particular chemistry between 2 people does not dissolve simply because a third person has entered the equation and changed its molecular structure. Adwoa Mensah had left the wedding as a guest, but she had left something behind, not deliberately, not as a calculated act. She had simply, by being there, by being exactly herself in that burgundy dress, by laughing at his jokes with the ease of 9 years of accumulated intimacy, left the unmistakable residue of herself on an evening that was supposed to belong entirely to someone else. The first year of the marriage was good. Let us not be cruel about this. Let us honor what was real. Kofi was present. He was attentive. He was the kind of husband who noticed when Priscilla was tired before she said so, who brought water at night without being asked, who remembered which of her colleagues had difficult personalities and asked about them by name. He was, in the domestic texture of daily life, exactly the man she had believed him to be. They moved into a house in cantonments, a 3-bedroom place with a garden that Priscilla immediately began to mismanage with tremendous enthusiasm, planting tomatoes that died and herbs that flourished unpredictably. She returned to work at Kolebu after the honeymoon. He designed a primary school in Tema that won a regional award. They had people over for dinner most Saturdays. They fought occasionally and made up well. They were, by any observable metric, happy. Adwoa's name came up exactly twice in the first year. The first time was in November, when Kofi mentioned casually that she had been promoted to senior associate at her firm. The whole family is proud, he said. She works very hard. Priscilla said that was wonderful and meant it, and thought nothing more of it. The second time was in March, when Priscilla found her name in Kofi's call log while using his phone to look up a restaurant booking. The call had lasted 47 minutes and felt the first faintest shadow of something she could not name. Not jealousy, not suspicion, something quieter. A slight coolness like a cloud crossing the sun for a moment before moving on. She did not ask about the call. She told herself it was family business. She believed this because she wanted to, because the alternative was a question whose answer she was not ready to receive. This is how betrayal survives in a marriage, not through dramatic lies, not through cinematic confrontations, but through the small, ordinary mercy of questions not asked, doors not opened, coolnesses not named. But here is what was happening in Kumasi during those months. Here is what Priscilla did not know. Adwoa was not simply working. Adwoa was managing. She was managing the most difficult thing a human being can manage, the archaeology of their own heart, the slow excavation of something that has been buried there so long it has become structural. She had tried in the months after the wedding to build distance. She had dated someone, a cardiologist named Emmanuel, who was attentive and thoughtful and who loved her in the clear, uncomplicated way that she had never quite been loved before. And for a while, she had almost convinced herself that this was enough, that what felt like settling was actually just choosing peace over turbulence, which was wisdom and not defeat. Emmanuel proposed in January, 8 months after the wedding. Adwoa said she needed time to think. Emmanuel, a patient man, gave her time. She spent that time calling Kofi, not about Emmanuel, not about the proposal. She called to talk about work, about family, about a documentary she had watched that she thought he would find interesting. She called with the dedicated casuality of someone who is terrified of the real subject. And Kofi? God. Kofi answered every time. He laughed at her observations. He sent her the follow-up documentary she hadn't seen yet. He was exactly as present on the phone as she had always been, and she hated him for it because she needed him to be distant. She needed him to be unreachable. She needed the feeling to starve. But it did not starve. It found something to eat in those 47-minute calls, and it grew. In April, she told Emmanuel no. He was devastated. He was generous about it in the way of good men who had been hurt. He thanked her for her honesty. He told her she hoped she found what she was looking for, and he left without making her feel small, which was more grace than the situation required of him. Watch him go, and she felt something shift inside her that she could not fully interpret. Not relief, not grief exactly, something more like the recognition that she had made a choice she could not unmake, and that the choice was not really about Emmanuel at all. The second year of the marriage was different. Not dramatically different, not in any way that Priscilla could have put in a police report or submitted as evidence to a court of opinion. It was different the way weather is different in the weeks before a season changes. The light shifts slightly. The air carries a different weight. You sleep a little less easily without knowing why. Kofi was still present. He was still attentive, but there was something, a quality of attention perhaps, some fractional degree of his focus that had been redirected elsewhere that Priscilla could not locate precisely enough to confront. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself this was what the second year felt like, not worse than the first, but more real, stripped of the ceremonial euphoria of newness. She told herself she was tired from work. She told herself many things that were possibly true and possibly not.
In September, she threw a surprise dinner for Kofi's birthday. She invited 18 people, cooked for 2 days, and arranged for his best friend to bring him home under the pretense of a quiet drink. He walked through the door, and his face, when the lights came on and everyone shouted, his face did exactly what she needed it to do. He was genuinely surprised, genuinely moved. He pulled her into him in front of everyone and said against her hair, "You are extraordinary." And she felt the doubt dissolve entirely. Later that night, after the guests had gone and she was washing the last of the dishes while he cleared the table behind her, she asked, lightly, without turning around, "Did Adwoa call today for your birthday?" A beat, just a small beat, the kind that most people would not notice. "Yes, she did, earlier, when I was still at the office." "That's nice," Priscilla said. "She's thoughtful." "She is," he said. They went to bed, and he held her the way he always held her, and she told herself it was nothing. The beat, the fraction of a second between her question and his answer, was nothing. It was the natural pause of someone reaching to remember. It was nothing. But the body knows before the mind does. Priscilla's body had already begun to keep its own record, quietly, without telling her, the way the body keeps its most important records. If you are still watching, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Stay with us. The story is about to change everything you think you know. The birthday card was in the inside pocket of the navy blazer. She found it on a Tuesday in October, 11 months after the birthday dinner, because she was having the blazer dry cleaned. The lapel had picked up a smear of something at a client dinner the week before, and she was checking the pockets before sending it, the way you check pockets, as habit, as courtesy, as the 10,000 small administrative acts of loving someone. The envelope was already opened. She almost put it back. She did put it back, actually. She set it back in the pocket, and then she stood in the middle of the bedroom with the blazer in her arms and felt something very still and very cold move through her. And she took the envelope out again and removed the card. The outside of the card was a landscape, mountains, watercolor, blue, the kind of card you find in a boutique hotel gift shop or an airport, generic and not generic simultaneously. She opened it. The message was not long. That was the first thing she noticed, its brevity. Whoever had written it was practiced in economy, in the art of saying everything in very few words, because they had developed a language built for exactly that purpose, for the spaces between the official record, for the margins where official things do not go. It said, "Another year. Every year I think the feeling will be smaller. Every year I am wrong. You know what I can't say. I know what you can't do. We are very good at being impossible. Thank you for existing. A." Priscilla read it once. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed very slowly, the way that people sit when their legs have decided something before their brain has. She read it again. Then she put the card back in the envelope, put the envelope back in the pocket, folded the blazer carefully, and set it on the chair by the door. She did not send it to the dry cleaner that day. She did not do anything at all for what felt like a very long time. She sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet of the afternoon, while outside the garden birds argued in the flame tree, and the neighborhood generator hummed, and the world continued its business completely indifferent to the fact that hers had just been disassembled. A. Adwoa, the cousin from Kumasi who had left the wedding at 11:15, who had embraced her with both arms, who had said, "Take care of him. He needs someone who won't disappear on him. Every year I think the feeling will be smaller. Every year I am wrong." Priscilla pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum, against the place where the pressure had gathered. She breathed very carefully, the way they had taught her in her nursing training to breathe when encountering something that requires you to remain functional. Not through the nose, not deep gulping breaths, but the slow metered breathing of someone who needs to keep their hands steady. Because the other thing about being a nurse is that you learn early that you cannot afford to fall apart at the moment of discovery. Falling apart is a luxury. You fall apart later, privately, when the work is done. First, you have to assess. First, you have to understand what you are actually dealing with. So she breathed. She thought. She thought about the 47-minute phone call she had seen in the log. She thought about the beat, that fraction of a second before he said, "Yes, she called today." She thought about the way Adwoa had looked at Kofi across the reception hall. She had thought at the time that it was a look of family warmth. She understood now, retroactively, and with an clarity that was almost unbearable, that it was not warmth at all. Or rather, it was warmth, but the specific kind, the kind that burns. We are very good at being impossible. She thought about the fact that Kofi had pepped the card, had not thrown it away, had placed it in the inside pocket of a blazer he wore occasionally, which meant what? That he carried it intentionally? That he forgot it was there? That there was a version of him that wanted it close and a version of him that wanted to pretend it didn't exist, and those two versions had reached a compromise that involved the inside pocket of a blazer he had not worn in nearly a year. She did not know. She knew almost nothing, actually. She had a card with 3 sentences. She had a letter of the alphabet for a signature. She had 9 words that were constructed specifically to communicate without being explicit, because the feeling could be anything, couldn't it? The feeling could be grief over a lost friendship, over a road not taken, over anything at all, except that Priscilla was not stupid. Priscilla was a woman who had spent 3 years in South Sudan watching human beings navigate situations of impossible complexity, and she had developed through that experience a very clean relationship with the truth. She did not often flinch from it. She was not flinching now. She sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet of the afternoon and she faced what she knew. That the woman her husband had called his cousin had attended their wedding as a guest and had left as something else entirely. Not a cousin, not a stranger, not a ghost. Something alive and present and continuous. Something that wrote birthday cards with the handwriting of a woman still in motion, still turning toward, still believing in the possibility of something that had not yet fully closed. She did not confront him that night. This surprised her afterward, the fact that she didn't. She had always believed herself to be the kind of woman who confronted things directly. It was part of how she understood herself. But that night, she cooked rice and kontomire stew, and they ate at the table, and she asked him about a project he was working on in Tema, and he told her about a problem with the foundation specs, and she listened and nodded and passed him the water. And the card sat in the inside pocket of the blazer on the chair by the bedroom door, throughout all of it, like a small, breathing secret between them that only she was aware of. She was doing something. She was not yet sure what it was. She was moving through the familiar landscape of her marriage and trying to see its actual dimensions. Not the dimensions she had assumed, but the real ones. The ones that had been there all along beneath the surface she had been walking on. She thought about Auntie Adwoa, the one who had come to her at the reception and said, "That is Adwoa. She is Kofi's cousin from Kumasi." Had Auntie Adwoa known? Had she been told to say it, coached into it, made complicit without understanding the full weight of what she was carrying? Or had she simply believed it herself? Had Kofi constructed a version of his history that was internally consistent enough that even his family had absorbed and repeated it? She thought about Kofi's mother, the woman who had cried during the vows. She had always seemed to Priscilla to be genuinely fond of her,
genuinely invested in the marriage. And yet, if she had known Adwoa for years, known her as a fixture in Kofi's life, had she known the real nature of what she was witnessing? Was there something in those wedding day tears that was not entirely joy? Or was Priscilla building a conspiracy where there was none? Was she constructing a network of knowing complicity when the truth might be simpler? That Kofi had compartmentalized with enough skill that no one around him had the full picture. That he had kept these rooms of his life separate and locked. That she was not the only one who had been navigating a map with sections deliberately left blank? She did not sleep well that night. She lay in the dark beside her husband and listened to him breathe. The familiar cadence of it, the rhythm she had memorized without meaning to, the way his breathing deepened and slowed and occasionally hitched before settling again. And she thought, I know the sound of this man sleeping. I know his breathing in the dark. I know what he looks like when he has a headache, what he sounds like when he's genuinely laughing versus laughing to be polite, what he does with his hands when he's working through a problem. I know him, she thought, except that I did not know this. She called her best friend Abena in the morning. Abena was the kind of friend who had been telling Priscilla uncomfortable truths for 15 years, which made her terrible or indispensable depending on the day. Come over, Abena said after Priscilla had told her what she had found. Not, are you sure? Not, maybe there's an explanation. Just come over. Priscilla drove to Abena's house in Labone. Abena opened the door and looked at her face and said nothing, just stepped back to let her in. And Priscilla sat on the familiar sofa and put the card on the coffee table between them. Abena read it again, set it down. How long has this been going on? Abena said. I don't know, Priscilla said. I don't know if they've been physically. Priscilla, Abena's voice was not unkind. It was simply not interested in the evasion. This card is not from someone who has moved on. This is not the card of a former girlfriend who has accepted things. This is someone who is still, she paused, choosing the word carefully. This is someone who is still in it. She was at the wedding, Priscilla said. Abena looked at her. He brought her to the wedding, Abena. He introduced her as his cousin. She stood in my wedding photographs. Abena was quiet for a long moment. Do you know for certain she's actually his cousin? No, Priscilla pressed her palms together. But I know what that card says. Then you need to ask him, Abena said. I know. Not tonight, not when you're in this state, but soon. You need to ask him directly, and you need to ask him in a way that makes it impossible for him to escape into something technically true, but functionally a lie. Priscilla looked at her hands. What if he confirms it? Then you will know. And what do you do with knowing? Abena was quiet for a long moment again. Outside, her children were arguing about something in the garden. Ordinary, domestic, completely indifferent to the adult catastrophe occurring on the sofa 6 meters away. The sound of them was both comforting and savage. You do what you have always done, Abena said finally. You figure out what is true, and then you decide what you want to do with the truth. Priscilla spent a week inside her own life before she asked the question. A week in which she functioned normally, went to work, fed children saltwater injections and held their hands and said the things that frightened pediatric patients needed to hear. Came home, cooked, sat across from the table with Kofi and watched him with the new vision of someone who has been handed different glasses and cannot unlearn what she now sees with them. She watched him. She watched the way he was with her, genuinely warm, genuinely present, and tried to reconcile this with what she knew. She could not, but she could also not dismiss it, because the difficult truth about Kofi, the truth she had been turning over all week, was that neither version of him seemed false. The man who loved her clearly and consistently for 2 years, who married her with real intention, who held her in the dark, that man was real. And the man who kept that card in his blazer pocket, who answered 47-minute phone calls, who brought his history to her wedding and introduced it as family, that man was also real. They were the same man. This was not a contradiction. This was the most painful kind of truth, the kind that does not resolve. On the 7th evening, she made tea. She brought 2 cups to the sitting room. She sat across from him and waited until there was a natural pause in what he was reading, and she said,
"I found the card." He looked up. "The birthday card," she said. "In your blazer. I was taking it to the cleaners." The silence that followed was not the silence of shock. It was something else, something more complex, more already known. It was the silence of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and who has just had someone else put their hand on it. "Priscilla," he said. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't start with my name like that. Just tell me the truth." He set the book down. He did not look away from her, which she would think about later, the fact that he did not look away. "Adwoa and I were together before you, for a long time before you." "How long?" "From university. 4 years in university, and then after that it was complicated. We were never fully together, never fully." "How long, Kofi?" 9 years, he said. "On and off, mostly off at the end, but 9 years." The numbers sat in the room between them. "And you introduced her to me as your cousin?" He closed his eyes. "Yes." "On our wedding day?" "Yes." "And the card from your birthday this year, the one she wrote to tell you the feeling hasn't gotten smaller?" He opened his eyes. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not guilt exactly, not the performance of guilt, but something raw, something that looked like the face of a man who has been found out not in a lie, but in himself. "Are you still involved with her?" Priscilla said. "Not physically," he said. "Not since before you. I need you to believe that." "What does that mean, not physically?" He was quiet. "What does that mean, Kofi? What is the version of this that is not physical?" "It means I haven't let it go completely. It means that I didn't end it cleanly enough when I should have. And it means I've been carrying something I should have put down before I asked you to marry me, and I didn't, and I'm sorry. Priscilla, I am so deeply—" "Don't," she said again. She picked up her tea. She held it with both hands. She looked at him across the space between them, the good sofa, the coffee table, the home they had made together in its familiar Saturday evening configuration. And she understood something about the nature of love that she had not understood before, that it is not destroyed suddenly. It is not like a building in an earthquake. It is like water, like the bank of a river. It goes quietly, a little at a time, until one day you look at the shore and realize how much of it is gone. "I need you to tell me everything," she said. "All of it. Not the version designed to manage me. All of it." He told her. It took 2 hours. Here is what she learned. She learned that Adwoa had been at the wedding at Kofi's insistence, that he had invited her because he had been unable to face the architecture of a new life without this woman present at least at its foundation, which was a logic that made no sense to Priscilla and made complete sense to her simultaneously. She learned that his mother knew, had known since university, had told Kofi privately after the engagement to Priscilla was announced that he needed to make a choice and make it fully. He had told her he had, and he had, in his mind, in his intentions, but intentions, it turned out, and emotional reality were different countries that shared a border, and he had been living on the border for 2 years. She learned that the 47-minute phone call was one of many, not explicit, not romantic in any conventional sense, but intimate in the way that 2 people who have known each other for 9 years are intimate, which is to say, in a way that excluded her entirely, that pre-existed her, that would outlast anything she could say or do.
She learned that Adwoa knew she was coming to a married man's wedding, that she had agreed to the cousin's story, that she had arrived in that burgundy dress knowing exactly what she was doing, which meant that when she had opened both arms and said, "You are so beautiful," she had known. She looked directly into Priscilla's face and known. This, more than anything, this was the thing that Priscilla kept returning to in the weeks afterwards. Not Kofi's failure to close the door cleanly, not the 9 years she hadn't known about, not even the card. The hug, the full embrace, chin resting briefly on Priscilla's shoulder. "You are so beautiful." Adwoa's eyes saying, "I know things about him that you have not yet learned to ask about." She had known. What happened next is not what you might expect. Priscilla did not pack her things. She did not call a lawyer that night. She did not call Abena, did not call her mother, did not make any large declarative gestures that the situation seemed to demand. She finished her tea. She went to bed. She lay in the dark beside Kofi, who did not sleep at all, who lay rigid beside her, who she could feel was awake by the quality of his stillness, and she stared at the ceiling and she thought about what she wanted. Not what was fair, not what she deserved, not what anyone else would advise her. What she, Priscilla Asante Nebuating, wanted from the remainder of her life. And here is what the answer she arrived at, which was not the answer she expected. She did not yet know.
This honesty, the refusal to pretend she knew, the refusal to perform the clean outrage of a woman wronged, was perhaps the most radical thing she did in all of it. She did not know. She needed to know herself before she could know what to do, and she was not going to rush that. She was a woman who had held dying children in South Sudan and watched their parents make impossible decisions in the compressed time of crisis, and she had learned something from that about the danger of decisions made before you are ready. She would not be rushed by the timeline of betrayal. She called Adwoa herself, 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon from the parking lot of Kolebu, sitting in her car in her scrubs, her hair still in the bun she'd worn for the morning's ward rounds. Adwoa answered on the second ring. "Priscilla," she said, "just that, no pretense." "You knew," Priscilla said, "when you came to the wedding. You knew what you were to him, and you hugged me." Silence. "You knew," Priscilla said. "Why? I need to understand why." Adwoa took a breath. It was not a guilty breath. It was not defensive. It was the breath of someone who has prepared for this, who knows for 2 years this phone call was coming, who has spent that time deciding what they would say when it arrived. "I wanted to see if you were real," Adwoa said. "I had built you into something in my head, something perfect and imaginary. I needed to see if you were a real person." "And was I?" A long pause. "Yes," Adwoa said, "you were, you are." "And did that change anything for you?" Another pause, longer. "I thought it would," Adwoa said. "I thought if I met you and you were real and good, it would give me permission to let go. But it didn't." "No." Priscilla looked through the windshield at the parking lot, at the ordinary movement of people in and out of the hospital entrance, at the world continuing to function with its usual indifference to her particular devastation. "Are you in love with him?" she asked. The silence on the other end of the line was its own answer, full, complete. The silence of a woman who will not lie but cannot say the truth in words. "I see," Priscilla said. "Priscilla." "No," she said, quietly, firmly, in the voice of someone who knows exactly where her edges are. She ended the call. She sat in the parking lot for another 20 minutes. Then she went back inside because there were still children on the ward and they needed her. And the need of a sick child is one of the very few things in the world that overrides personal catastrophe. Here is where the story does not go where you expect it to go. Priscilla did not leave him immediately. She also did not stay in the way of a woman who has accepted diminishment. She proposed something that confused Kofi, that confused Abena, that she herself could not fully articulate except to say that it felt like the truth of what she needed. She said, "I need 6 months.
We are going to live in this house and we are going to be honest with each other. Actually honest, not the managed version. And at the end of 6 months, I will tell you whether I am staying or going. Kofi said, whatever you need. She said, and you need to talk to your mother. He was quiet for a moment. She needs to hear from you, not from me, that what she helped you conceal was wrong. Not to punish her, because she's going to be the grandmother of any children we might have, and I need to know that she understands what honesty means in this family. He looked at her across the kitchen table. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the parking lot of that East Legon restaurant on the night they met, when she had disagreed with him about the fish and not softened it with a smile, with the particular expression of a man encountering something larger than himself. Okay, he said, I am not doing this because I have forgiven you. I am doing this because I do not yet know what I want, and I refuse to make a decision from a place of not knowing. Do you understand the difference? He said he did. Whether he fully understood it, or whether any of us can fully understand the difference between forgiveness withheld and a decision deferred, this was the arrangement they made.
Adwoa, for her part, received Kofi's call the following week. He told her he would no longer be in contact, that he was committed to his marriage, that what they had been maintaining, even in its attenuated emotional but not physical form, was not sustainable and was not fair to either of them, most especially not to Priscilla. Adwoa listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, I know. He said, I'm sorry I handled this so badly for so long. She said, you should be. She meant it without cruelty. She was simply, finally, being precise. Will you be okay? He asked. Yes, she said, and then after a pause, eventually. She hung up first. She had always hung up first. It was one of the small dignities she had maintained throughout the years of impossible geography, to be the one to end the call, to be the one who did not wait for the click on the other end. She sat in her apartment in Kumasi with the phone in her hand. Outside, the Kumasi afternoon was enormous and gold. She thought about Emmanuel, the cardiologist. She thought about the fact that she had said no to a man who had loved her cleanly because she could not let go of something that had always been halfway. She thought about the birthday card and all the ones before it, the small architecture of communication she had built with Kofi across a decade, the entire scaffolding of it. She thought about Priscilla on the phone in her car, the voice of a woman who was neither performing anger nor suppressing it, just present, asking the real question. And Adwoa thought, she is better for him than I would have been. Not as comfort, not as a story she was telling herself to make the loss bearable, as a fact, as the kind of clear-eyed assessment she was capable of when she was being most honest with herself. She was better for him. And the knowledge of that did not make it hurt less, but it made it mean something. She got up. She went to the kitchen. She made herself tea. She stood at her window with the cup between her palms and looked out at the city in the late afternoon light. And she began, slowly, with the particular reluctance of someone who is turning away from something they cannot replace, to think about what came next for her. And the 6 months? At the end of the 6 months, Priscilla made her decision. She did not announce it. She did not make a speech. She simply, one evening, reached across the table and took Kofi's hand. He looked at her. She said, I am not staying because I am not hot. I am staying because I have decided that what we are building together is worth what it will cost me to rebuild it. But you need to know, I mean this exactly, that I will never pretend the cost was small. I will never perform a forgiveness I have not reached. If I ever reach it, you'll know. He held her hand with both of his. And if you don't? He asked. She looked at him steadily. Then I'll know that too, and I'll tell you, and we will be honest about it. This is not a happy ending,
please understand that it is not being offered as one. There is no version of this story in which nothing was lost, in which 2 years of a marriage were conducted over a subterranean layer of buried history, in which a woman was not embraced on her own wedding day by the woman who was still in love with her husband, in which a birthday card did not sit in a blazer pocket for a year like a small, patient bomb. Something was lost. Things that are lost do not return simply because you decide to continue. But here is what Priscilla had learned in the waiting, in the 6 months of honest and terrible excavation. That the truth, even when it is late, even when it is painful, even when it comes wrapped in the evidence of someone else's courage or cowardice, is always preferable to the comfortable lie. That knowing is always better than not knowing, even when what you know breaks something open in you. That she was a woman who could hold the full weight of a complicated truth in both hands and not drop it. And this, of all the things she learned about herself that year, it was the one she would carry forward into whatever came next. Adwoa Mensah eventually left Kumasi. She took a position at a firm in London 18 months after the wedding. She sent Priscilla a message before she left. Just a few words, restrained and exact. It said, "I hope you both find what you are working towards. I am sorry for my part in it." Priscilla read it 3 times. She did not reply immediately. She thought about what reply was true, rather than what reply was gracious or what reply was devastating. She thought for a full day. Then she wrote, "Thank you for saying so." She sent it. She put the phone down. She went out into the garden where her herbs were growing unexpectedly, thriving despite her, and she stood in the evening light and breathed. The river does not fight the stone. It finds another way. If this story reached you today, perhaps it was meant to. Perhaps you are navigating your own landscape of half-spoken truths, your own quiet archaeology of a life you thought you understood. We do not always get the story we were promised. We get the story we must learn to live inside. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this with someone who understands that real stories do not always end neatly, only honestly. We will see you in the next one.